don't forget, you can continue to order a free at-home test through our Say Yes to COVID test portal. And I know that information is up. I want to make sure everybody is doing everything they can to have a set of tests available in case they have symptoms or they've been exposed to somebody with COVID-19.
Well, that's our State Secretary of Health, Umair Shah, talking about the need for COVID testing and how to get it in our state. So why are free COVID tests from the federal government going away? And what's the story with getting a booster shot this fall? Plus, what are we learning about Seattle's quest for a new police chief? And what local measure is coming back from the dead to make its way to your ballot in just a few months? We have these stories and so much more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And I'm joined by David Croman from the Seattle Times. And David, we're going to talk about Sound Transit on the show a little bit later on, but I saw you had mentioned earlier in a wonderful tweet, Julio Rodriguez, rookie superstar of the Mariners, he's getting some Sound Transit-like money in a new contract with the M's, a deal that could go as high as $470 million over the next 17 years. So definitely big money, but a lot of it based on performance levels. And it had me wondering, should Sound Transit pick up Mariners president Jerry DiPoto as a special advisor so we could build some of this into ST3, get these projects going a little faster? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's maybe they could use the help. Well, it was mostly the fact that this contract could go till 2039, which is
it's amazing. It's a long time.
Yeah, so maybe at the end of Julio's contract, you will maybe possibly be able to take light rail from West Seattle to Ballard.
I can't wait. Well, thanks for breaking that piece down. Thanks, David, always for joining me here. Thanks also to our listeners. Thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They're on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our patrons. We're hoping to welcome more of you aboard at the $10 level so we can send you your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug and feature you on our mugshot of the week. This week, it's Thomas. Looks like a fine cup of coffee outside on the bistro table there. Thank you, Thomas, for sending that in. And enjoy this glorious end of summer as long as you can outside. Still so nice and warm. If you do listen, please do become a patron. We would love to have your support. That's Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Finally, thank you to Converge Media. The video of the podcast airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get her going with right here, right now. David, some COVID news to discuss with you. I keep seeing these indicators that maybe we are emerging from the pandemic. We had this recent announcement from the feds that those free COVID tests they used to mail out to you, well, that program is going away this Friday. Now, our state, as you heard at the top of the show, is continuing its free testing program, so that's still out there. And there is still some concern at the state level about some strain on our hospital system locally. But David, just looking at this federal program going away, what does that say about where we are in the pandemic? Because I'm seeing some trends that look promising, but still about 500 people dying every day in the U.S. from COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's just probably the government is feeling what a lot of individuals are feeling, which is they don't feel like they have the momentum or the will to kind of keep up the same level of vigilance that they'd had before. And so, we saw kind of an unprecedented period of government intervention during the pandemic and free tests, stimulus checks, a lot more kind of safety net and support around this stuff. And that's, starting to go away. And I think just because the political will is not quite there and it is not the thing that voters are bringing up to politicians as much as they used to. I think I read that this next round of COVID booster shots will probably be the last free ones. And so, it seems like we're fair or not starting to make the pivot back toward what healthcare looked like before the pandemic.
Right. Yeah, it's this very fine line between public opinion and public health and where those two intersect and sometimes don't intersect. There's definitely some issues there, but I wanted to point out about that booster shot. So we're in a state where roughly 70% of us have received at least one vaccination shot. And now we're hearing this news that we will see this Omicron booster shot. I'm interested in this, David, because we had the spike in cases in 2020 and 2021 towards the end of the year, getting closer to the holidays. Are we going to see that again? Would that lead more people to get a booster and looking at what happened over the past couple of years, or are people just done with it and not going to get that additional shot? What do you think?
Well, not that many people got, with each new shot, the participation has dropped off. a lot fewer people got the first booster than the first round. And then, for folks who are qualified, the participation in the fourth booster has gone way down. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe some of that is people waiting for the kind of more Omicron tailored booster to come around. And if that's true, maybe we'd see higher participation. But yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, they've just decided they're done. And I think with that comes maybe not as high participation as we'd like to see.
Right. And it's just one of these interesting, I guess, mixed messages is the way I look at it here, because you've got cruise lines allowing unvaccinated passengers now. I saw that in the headlines a couple of days ago. But then we still have some concern about this. And hey, make sure you get your booster shot. Do you sense that whole mixed message piece of this? Because I think that's been a big issue over the extent of the pandemic here when it comes to public health, handing out information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is exactly where we're at right now, which is the message we're getting from most. I mean, but for all intents and purposes, there are very few restrictions anymore on anything that people do.
Right.
There's some exceptions maybe in government, but there's no one's checking vaccination cards, and there's even in Seattle, you go to the grocery store and there's not very much mask usage. So. Again, there is a disconnect between kind of the statistics that we see, which is, still a significant number of people dying from this every year, and what's actually being conveyed. Somewhere along the line, people in both the public and private sector decided that there was no kind of going back to having these requirements in place. And, here we are.
Yeah, what happens when we get another surge this fall and winter? I'm very interested to see that. All right, I'm going to move on to another topic here. And the Seattle City Council, of course, everybody is still on its 2-week summer break, back in session after Labor Day. And a big topic they're going to be wrestling with when they do come back, selecting a new police chief. So the city recently released some information about this process. The mayor's office has held 7 community conversations, as they're being called, to get feedback, including a survey from more than 1,300 people. And I thought this was interesting, David. The top issue identified in that survey, it's actually probably no surprise here, responding to crime and decreasing 911 response times. A distant fourth on this list, developing a third public safety department. And I bring this up, David, because I think it's going to be this very interesting budget disagreement between the council and the mayor, the council pushing for alternatives to policing this third department, and the mayor possibly referring to the survey and saying, well, that's not a top priority. What do you make of these survey results as I talk about them with you and this public process the mayor's office is going through to get a new police chief?
Yeah, the public process is not police chiefs, and I think this is written into the charter actually, tend to be a lot more open than searches for other department heads.
Right.
You find out who the finalists are kind of earlier. They have to be disclosed, I'm pretty sure.
More public facing for sure on this.
Most people would agree that when it comes to government services, they're more likely to interact with a police officer than they are, say, a utility worker. And so therefore whoever the head is of the department is more important, at least from a public facing perspective. So, as far as priorities, no, I mean, I don't think that's surprising that people would say that. And I think we kind of knew that based on the fact that Bruce Harrell ran on that and won pretty comfortably. I also think, to a certain extent, this notion of creating a new department and, there are enough sort of, that's complicated enough that's not like something that people would maybe immediately go to when asked what their priority is. I think that members of the council would probably say, well, in some ways, those two things are related, which is if you want to free up more officers to do more things that people see as traditionally policing, then you could come up with alternatives for lower level stuff or mental health crises or things like that. So I don't know that those two things are necessarily have to be in conflict with each other.
Right.
It's not surprising to me that the number one priority is crime. I mean, this is a countrywide thing that crime rates have gone up and police recruitment is struggling and the department is losing officers still. So, I think it's simply an issue, and I would be surprised if it was anything else than the top priority.
Right. Yeah. And I can hear the phrase now, it's a both and conversation
Right.
in the council budget deliberation soon. It was interesting. The lowest priority on this list was the SPD being responsible with SPD resources, which I know is a priority, but when you put it forth on the list, it certainly puts things in perspective here. But I wanted to talk about next steps here, David, because the mayor will receive a list of 3 candidates on September 8th. So that's next week. And then on the evening of September 15th, I'll actually be talking with those 3 candidates on the Seattle channel in the evening. They'll answer questions sent in by the public. Mayor's office taking in these questions right now and generating a list of topics. You can actually check out the mayor's website, folks. Submit a question if you'd like. Look under the mayor's blog for a news release on this story, and the link is there. But David, I thought I'd just open it up here. If you had a question, or maybe even a couple for these candidates, what would you want to ask the next person who wants to be the next Seattle police chief?
Nah, you put me on the spot here. I don't.
Absolutely. Let's do it, man. Come on.
If I had a question for them, I mean, I think for me, the question around policing has always been one of priorities, which is police. The statistics and anecdotally, we know that police are responding to a lot of calls that involve people in mental health crisis, people experiencing homelessness, people with substance use, mental illness. A lot of issues that, when you lay them out, I don't know that anyone, including police officers, necessarily see those as things that traditionally police sign up to do. And so, my question for them is what do you do about that? I mean, are officers properly responding to what they should be responding to now? And if not, how do you change that?
Yeah, that's a huge question here. I wonder, I think there's going to be a lot of questions around that, David. I think a lot of questions around changing the culture of the police department, questions that have been around for decades here, but certainly that mental health piece of it is a huge part of what it means to be a police officer now in our modern world. So a lot happening there. Again, get those questions into the mayor's office. If you'd like to do that, you can check it out on his webpage, go to his blog, and you'll see that news release, and the link will be right there. All right, so coming up, just when you thought it was safe to say, we're not going to vote on a social housing measure here in Seattle, guess what? It's back. We got the details coming up on Now Hear This. Okay, so remember back a few months ago when a group called House Our Neighbors was talking about a new social housing measure to increase the amount of affordable housing in our region. They wanted to make the November ballot, but did not. Fell about 5,000 signatures short of that back in June. So after that, there's a 20-day window to try to get those extra signatures. House Our Neighbors got those signatures, but turns out they're going to be too late for the November ballot, so get ready for a special election in the early part of 2023. Why is this measure needed? Just getting some background on this. I asked that question of Tiffany McCoy, the co-chair of the Yes on I-135 campaign. This was on the Seattle channel back in May.
Under current affordable housing mechanisms that are all ultimately dependent on federal financing mechanisms, which are extremely restrictive and onerous, we will never meet our housing needs at scale. So that's why we, through the House Our Neighbors Coalition, are putting forward Initiative 135.
Well, David, a little more background on this to start. I-135 would establish a public development authority to build units that would be owned by the public and permanently affordable for people making 0 to 120% of the area median income. The way it's funded, it's a combination of government grants, low interest loans that bond against future revenue, and rent from higher income residents, subsidizing lower income residents. There was a lot of tenacious work to get this on the ballot, getting those extra signatures, but it'll be something around a February vote, it looks like, and that generally means fewer people show up. How do you think that affects how this measure will turn out? Your thoughts about seeing this on the ballot?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to, is it understandable enough to people that they want to back it? You want, initiatives like this tend to do better when they're simple and clear. I'm not saying it's not, but
there's a lot of detail to this one for sure. Yeah.
Right. I think people will have questions. I mean, myself included, is how exactly does this look different than, say, the Seattle Housing Authority? What distinguishes this? I think, I haven't been covering this very closely, so there's probably an answer, but I think that'll be something that they'll need to explain and how does this interact with other affordable housing initiatives? The city asks voters for money every, roughly once a decade. through the Seattle housing levy, and there's a lot of affordable housing developers and things like that. So how does this can this be done in a way that doesn't take away from some of the efforts that already exist? I guess it comes down to, at least sort of more holistically for me, is the question of whether or not whether or not affordable housing right now is sort of a zero-sum game. Like, if you introduce a new system, does it necessarily take away from other systems that exist already, or can you build enough momentum around this that you can, by doing this, actually bring more money into the system to develop housing? At the end of the day, it really comes down to money and
absolutely.
space.
And the main difference I'm seeing here, David, in the work I've done on this, is where a lot of the other measures that are out there depend on federal dollars, and there are very strict requirements for what they can do with those federal dollars, as in make sure you're helping the people from 0 to 30% of the area median income. This is a measure that's trying to help people up to 120% of area median income. So it has some different logistics there, some different parameters involved here. But I think you bring up a really good point, because there will be a political battle over this. The housing levy, that's on the ballot next year. And then when you think about what's happening with this group here, House Our Neighbors, this was the group that successfully blocked the Compassion Seattle City Charter Amendment from making the ballot on November of last year. And that was the amendment, if you remember, from Compassion Seattle, would have set aside specific amounts to invest in homelessness. Critics said it would have basically legitimized any and all sweeps of homeless people. Mayor Harrell was actually speaking in favor of it on the campaign trail. So I see a couple of fights here, David, one between the progressive and perhaps more moderate factions within different political movers and shakers of Seattle. But then also, as you bring up, on the progressive side, too, you've got some groups like the Housing Development Consortium of King County saying, wait a minute, you're bringing in some extra competition here. We're looking for those grant dollars, too, when it comes to developing housing. So I think there's a lot of battles that this measure is going to have to face.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I was sort of saying before, I think it all comes down to money and space. And, I think the success of this is contingent on it leading to more money and more space for more housing. I think there are a lot of people in the housing world who are in some ways not taking, I've talked to a couple of people who are not taking a stance on this because of that question. They say, well, yes, we support this in principle. Seems fine. But, where's the money coming from? How is this funded? And again, that's just what it all comes down to is housing is expensive, and there's and competitive, and can you get enough money to subsidize housing for people? If the answer to that is yes, then, and they can show that it's going to be yes, then I think it could win support.
Yeah. Interesting to see how this is going to play out over the next couple months and the start of next year, too. So November, we've got a whole bunch of things on the ballot this year, which is right around the corner. But then really do need to keep an eye on that next year, because the Seattle housing levy is up for renewal next year, too. So it'll be very interesting to see where different city leaders fall around that one. All right, I wanted to move on to another issue here, and I talked about this ever so briefly at the top of the show, David, and I know it's a story you're tracking in the transportation world, and it really does affect everybody out there, especially if you pay taxes. This affects you. Sound Transit now revealing more delays in a recent report. We're talking about a holdup of at least a year for the expansion of our light rail system, after inspectors found that the concrete plinths, or the supports for the track across Lake Washington, were not doing the job. Some shoddy workmanship there from what I have seen in the reports. In other areas, some unstable soil between Kent and Federal Way, not really helping either. David, your reactions to this, what does it mean for rising costs? It's just some really difficult news for an agency in the midst of a leadership change. Yeah,
I mean, Sound Transit is probably among the most there's very few agencies in the state that are under more of a microscope from people, because they have a lot of power and they have a lot of money, and that I think attracts a lot of attention, especially from people who are skeptical of building out a massive light rail system right now. And so, what this does, I think it certainly doesn't help their case, especially because, obviously there are. This is the biggest project in Seattle and Washington state history, really, right? The size of this. And so you would expect, yes, of course, there are going to be delays and probably cost increases. I mean, every construction project is dealing with cost increases. But in this case, as you alluded to, there also seems to be something have gone wrong with some contractor oversight. And that then therefore has smacks of, do they have their eye on the ball as much as they should? Are they watching? Why are there issues here with these concrete plinths? Interestingly, Claudia Balducci, King County Council member Claudia Balducci, came out with an op-ed actually in my paper, I think it was over the weekend, basically advocating for getting the East Side Rail up and running.
I was going to bring this up. What do you think about that idea? Kind of an East Side only, like Redmond, Bellevue, maybe even Mercer Island thing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the crossing Lake Washington was always going to be the most complicated part of this project. And, I think Sound Transit, I think likes the vision of sort of expanding the system and, having these big kind of reveals where suddenly you've got this whole new arm of a system. This would deprive them of that if they opened up East Side. They've got a disparate system, but it would also potentially get service up and running quicker. So, I think as my colleague Mike pointed out, it's rare that that we see a little news made in the op-ed section of our own paper. But I think this is a novel idea that I had not heard about before reading her op-ed, and that'll be interesting to see if as a sort of gesture of creativity and go-get-emness, Sound Transit decides that they're going to rejigger things and try and open up the East Side line more quickly. And if there's ever a time to do it, in some ways now is that, because of course commuting is still down, and that crossing of Lake Washington was really to help commuters get from the East Side into downtown Seattle. And so maybe there's a decent argument to be made for treating this line, at least to start, more as a kind of more standard urban transit line, which is people can use it to get around on the East Side, even if they can't use it yet to commute into downtown Seattle.
Right, and maybe it's the way that Sound Transit could get at least a little bit of a win and show some use of the dollars that's actually creating something, because I got to say, this Lake Washington thing looks like it could turn into a bit of a mess. I think they're looking for some positive news, and maybe the East Side, if they decided to go that route, could provide that. Yeah,
possibly. And also, it's just, crossing a lake is more complicated than building it on land. And so, if it's just going to be this one crossing that delays the opening of that whole section for a long time, maybe they can, might as well put some of that infrastructure that they've built out there already to use.
Right.
So, I don't know. It's it's an interesting thought. We'll see.
Just last thought on this. You've covered some of these mega projects before. I just wonder how much rejiggering, retooling, or whatever would be needed to change that focus, because clearly they've got some big issues there crossing Lake Washington. Do they have the bandwidth, the juice, however you want to look at it, to move things, and logistically could it work? I guess those are the big questions they have to figure out right now. I don't know the answer to any of that. I wish. That's going to be super interesting to figure that one out. So thank you for breaking all those pieces down there with me, David. All right, up next, we're going to talk a little bit more about transportation dollars here, specifically for bike and pedestrian projects across the state. David's got you covered on Transportation Talk. David, you had a piece recently in the Seattle Times about cities and counties pushing for some state dollars for bicycle and pedestrian projects. A lot more of these local governments, including smaller ones, are reaching out for the support. Why is that happening? What did you find out?
Yeah, it's interesting. The state has made available these grant dollars for bike and pedestrian projects and routes to school for many years now. But, interestingly, a lot of smaller towns and cities had basically given up on ever applying to these because they just didn't have the resources, time and energy to put together grants, and their odds of they were not winning them. They weren't getting the grants. And so they had just kind of given up on ever applying. And as a result, interest in these programs had kind of stagnated for a while. But during the last legislative session, Democrats almost exclusively passed this $17 billion transportation package. And as part of that, there's a little over $1.3 billion for pedestrian and bike and walking projects and things like that. And so these grant programs got a pretty big boost in the arm. But, almost more than that, I think that spurred the state to be more proactive about reaching out to these small towns and cities and encouraging them to apply again. And it seems to have succeeded because they got about 2.5 times the amount of interest and ask for money than they've gotten in the past.
Right.
Which is then the irony there is
that's the good news, right?
Yeah. The interest in the program is so high that it appears that it's still going to then therefore be very competitive to actually get any of this money because there's more interest than there is additional dollars. But it does show that I think it does kind of prove in some ways the case that some Democratic lawmakers are making, which is the need and the desire is out there for this funding. And basically, as much money as we put into this, it will be put to use. And I think that kind of proves out that case to a certain extent.
Right. And you mentioned these different smaller governments out there having some issues just putting resources towards the grant process, which can be onerous. And then also, I think it's an issue of some of these different projects of, oh boy, we just need to connect that last piece of sidewalk out there. I mean, those cost some big money too, and not all city governments are able to get the wherewithal together to make those happen. Can you talk to me about some of the different projects that we're talking about here? Is it sidewalk connections or what are we looking at?
Yeah, a lot of it is sidewalk connections. I mean, the sidewalks...
That's in Seattle, too. Right. That's a huge issue, right?
Right, exactly. And what we see in North Seattle is true, I think, in a lot of locations. And, for some cities, I talked about Winthrop in the piece. And that's an interesting case because, I don't know, for folks who have been to Winthrop, they've got that kind of Western theme downtown. And if you head south, there's that pedestrian bridge over the river, and it connects to this parking lot. And so, part of their whole plan, they want to make that parking lot more of the kind of central parking area so that they have less cars in the downtown area and more people walking. And but that whole plan is sort of contingent on this one block of sidewalk that's missing. And they're really hesitant to execute that plan while telling people to walk on the side of a pretty busy road. And so, it's more than just, they want a scenic little walkway. It's really kind of a linchpin to the plan for that whole town. And so I think you can kind of, a sidewalk in Seattle, obviously, certain projects in Seattle are important, but I think for some of these small towns, it really does oftentimes come down to if we can get this one stretch of pedestrian, make this one stretch more safe for pedestrians, it really does kind of help support the whole town.
Interesting. Yeah, I just remember going to Leavenworth over the past several years here, watching how that has transformed, turning that lower area near all the shops there into a pedestrian-only area and taking cars out of there for parking. Certainly a lot safer, but you think about that, there really is a big connection between these projects where it's not just a sidewalk. This is something that provides a lot of economic impact here. And then I guess these dollars are going to start going out over the next couple months. We're going to see these projects come online pretty soon.
Yeah, so it's a 2-year funding cycle. So that
I see. Okay.
But then interestingly, I think another barrier was that the state wanted kind of shovel-ready projects, but getting to shovel-ready is an expensive process in and of itself.
True.
So these dollars will actually go toward just designing projects. So you might not actually see them built out, but I think that's a big change for a lot of small cities to actually be able to get money to just plan and design these projects, which is a big change.
An important part of this, too. Thank you for breaking that down, David. Really interesting story there in the Seattle Times. All right, we got to finish up here. We were joking last week about the upward trend of Google searches for zucchini this time of year. You tweeted about this, even put the graph on there with your tweet, which is brilliant. And then this actually turned into a news story in Spokane. What happened here? Did you get credit for this? What's going on, man?
Well, I didn't demand credit for it. I saw some news outlet used the graph as an excuse to put out some zucchini bread recipes and things like that. Which, if I can help people use up their zucchini, then I'm happy to be of service.
Very well, very well. KXOY, David Croman deserves a little extra credit on that one, but that was great stuff. All the zucchini news you need and more. David, thank you as always for joining me, my friend. Thanks to everybody listening. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is available on all the major platforms. And once again, if you are a listener, please do support the show on Patreon. We couldn't do it without you. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media 2. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2022.